In this video I'm going to be overhauling the clutch master. This is my 2017 KTM 250XC. It's just coming up to 440 hours. One of the things I love about the KTM off-road bikes is the hydraulic clutch. And other than changing the fluid about once a year, and I've changed the clutch plates twice, other than that, the operation has been flawless, and I love the feel of the clutch. I can ride all day, don't get tired. It gauges very positively, really good clutch, doesn't fade at all. But just recently I've noticed that the clutch doesn't disengage fully when I'm riding with two fingers like this. I have to pull clutch fully into the bar to disengage it fully. Also, I noticed that if the bike is leant over to the left, when I pick it up again, for example, if I put it down to remove some trail debris, a tree or something like that, and it's been on its side for 10 minutes or so, when I pick it back up, it feels like air has got into the line. And I can lean it over to the right, flick the lever a lot, and it often clears itself. But that kind of shows that there's something wrong with the clutch master. So this video I'm going to show how to overhaul the clutch master. Before we start working on the clutch, make sure the clutch master is completely free of dirt. Give it a good wash, spray it down with brake cleaner, etc. Also inside the clutch, this is a Brembo clutch and it uses brake fluid. I've got some gloves on to protect my skin. Also, you don't want to getting brake fluid over the frame painted areas because it could affect that, so be careful about that. Also, look on the cap of your clutch and see what fluid it takes. So this Brembo one takes either .4 or .5 brake fluid, and I know most of the Magara ones, they take a mineral oil, so be sure to look that up and make sure you have the correct fluid ready. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take the clutch lever off. So this Renthal and tow lever has a rubber boot which just slides off, and then I can get to the bolt which holds it on and undo it. And be careful that you don't lose this spring. And I can see this is quite dirty in here, so I'm going to use some brake cleaner and clean out all the dirt and debris before I go any further. Okay, next I'm going to remove the cap and take out all the fluid inside. And this is a Torx 20 fastener. So make sure you use the right Torx bit. If you use one that's too small or the incorrect one, it's quite easy to strip the heads of these bolts. Okay, then I'm using a syringe, and I'm just going to suck out the fluid inside and empty it. And if you haven't changed your fluid for quite a while, you'll find it's probably very black and dirty. And I'm going to rebuild the master on the bench, so I want to remove the hose and remove any cable ties. Okay, one thing to note regarding the clutch fluid is that I actually replaced it fairly recently when I started having issues. I thought it might be dirty clutch fluid that had got water in it, which was causing the problems. It turned out not to be the case, but the fluid is still pretty fresh. So my plan is to leave the fluid in the hose and undo it. And that way, when I come to refill the system, it should be very easy and quick to bleed. I'll obviously get some air in this area, and I'm going to reverse bleed it, so push up fresh fluid from the bottom and it'll just push the air out the master. If you've got old fluid, you definitely want to drain it all and not reuse that. So you can drain it from the clutch sleeve and replace everything. With this Moto clutch hose, it doesn't have a swivel connection. So my plan is just to loosen this, and then I'll undo the master from the handle, and then I can undo the clutch master from the hose. So I'm going to have a cloth ready in case there's any drips, but typically it doesn't spill too much. Okay, yeah, there was just a little dribble. And wipe it off any parts that gets onto straight away. And you can use brake cleaner as well. So I'm just going to leave the clutch hose like that so it doesn't get a lot of air into it. If you're going to be leaving the clutch hose for a long time and it's got fluid in, you definitely want to block off the end, make sure any dirt or water doesn't get into it. Okay, so here you can see the clutch master, and if you notice any more dirt on it, definitely clean it off before you proceed. The first step of the disassembly is to pull out the pin. This just pulls out easily like that. Okay, next I'm going to remove the rubber dust seal, and I'm not going to reuse this because the kit comes with a new one, so I'm just going to pull it out with some pliers. And the rubber dust cover didn't want to come out easily. As you can see, it came out in two pieces, so I pulled that bit out with pliers first and it broke off. And then this piece was actually quite tricky to get out. I had to use this pick tool, so I ran the pick tool round the outside and then used the pliers again, and it popped out. One thing to note regarding the push rod, which is this piece, is the second piece here. It should go all the way around, and it's actually been damaged and broken off, so there's only really this bit left. Yeah, you can just about see there. So I have to get a new one of these. I'm going to reuse it for tomorrow. It should be fine. But without this, it won't seal out dirt properly, and also be more prone to popping out from the dust boot. So I'm going to replace that. Okay, next I'm going to remove the anti-foaming plastic piece here. And this should just pop out with a screwdriver, and yeah, it's pretty easy. And the reason for removing that is so you can clean out inside properly. And the piston is held into the master with this circlip here, and to remove it you need to press down on the piston because it's spring loaded, and using some circuit pliers compress the circlip and remove that. It's going to be very tricky to show that on camera, so I'm using a 5mm diameter punch which fits nicely down the middle, and I'm just going to press down lightly to compress the spring, and then use my circlip pliers to remove it, and then I'll show you the parts afterwards. And you can see the circlip there, and to remove the piston I've partially removed it, and I'm going to pull it out with some pliers, and there you can see it, and the springs on the end. Okay, so next I'm going to thoroughly clean out the master body, and I'm going to use some parts cleaner and then use some air to spray it out. Then once you have the master cleaned out, it's a good idea to inspect the bore. You want to make sure there's no scratches, or if you put a new piston in, the seals aren't going to seal properly. So this looks fine. You're not going to be able to see it on the video. If you do find some damage, if it looks very worn, scratched, it's a good idea just to get a new master and not reuse it. Okay, and as a last step of the cleaning, I'm going to use some fresh brake fluid and flush the master out, make sure there's no brake cleaner or debris left in there. So I'm just going to put some in there, let that drain down through, and you can see it's coming out the end there. And then I'm going to put some down through the bore as well, and let that drain. This will also help lubricate the new piston going in. And this is a repair kit. You can see the part number there. I'll also put it in the description of the video. This is a 10mm piston repair kit. You should check the part list for your bike to make sure you get the right one, because I know some bikes take 9mm and others take 10mm, so be sure to get the right one. And these are the parts contained in the repair kit. There's a new piston, and you should note the direction of the seals on the piston. So this end is the lever end, and then the seals flare out, and you should check they're both orientated the correct direction, otherwise it's not going to work. And then there's a new rubber dust boot, a circlip spring for the piston, and there's this spring as well, and I checked the parts list and it doesn't show this, so I don't think this one's required. It looks like it's for the push rod on some models, but on my bike it's not required because the lever has a spring. And then there's some assembly fluid made by Brembo to apply to the seals, and I'm going to use that, and I think it does a really good job, especially for the install, to ensure that the seals don't tear when you install it. If you don't have any assembly lube, you can use brake fluid or mineral oil, whatever's specified for your clutch, but you definitely don't want to assemble it dry. And also included is this instruction manual, which covers disassembly and assembly. Okay, so here I've got the new piston and the spring, and you should note the spring has a wide end and a smaller end, and it's the small end that goes onto the piston. So you just press it on, you can rotate it, and it should pop on, so it just snapped then. And I'm going to use some of the assembly lube on the seals and also the piston, just to make sure or ensure that the seals don't tear during assembly. So I've got a light coating, and I'm going to let any excess drain off before assembling it. Okay, so now I'm ready to install the new piston and spring, and it simply pushes in. You should do this very carefully and try to minimize any chance of the seals tearing. So I'm going very slowly. I know you can't see it, but trying to align the piston with the bore and press gently without it tearing. And it's gone in now. One thing to note is that if you're not sure what's wrong with your master and disassemble it, take the piston out, you should never reuse the piston seals. It specifically mentions that in the instructions, so I think that's really good advice, and always to use a new piston or at least seals. I couldn't find anywhere to buy just the seals on their own. I think it's a good idea to install a new set anyway, but yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, so now I'm ready to install this circlip, and one thing you should note is there's a rounded edge and a sharp edge, and the sharp edge should be out so it holds in the groove well. So make sure you get the correct orientation. And then I'm going to use my 5mm punch to push down on the piston spring while I install the circlip with the circlip pliers. And because of the shape and where my hands are, you're not going to be able to see this, so I'll just show it after the installation. So I put that down there, and then I'll just press on it and install it. Okay, so there you can see the new piston installed with the circlip holding in place. Once you put the circlip in, it's a good idea to press all around the edge of the circlip and make sure it's seated properly. Okay, now I'm ready to reinstall the push rod and the dust boot. And I'm going to use some silicone grease on the end of the push rod, which engages onto the master. And just put a small amount on the end to lubricate it. And then I'm going to push this through. As I mentioned, I'm going to replace this pin, but I don't have a spare right now. So I'll do that next week. And then to install this, it's a little bit tricky pushing it in. So you can use a socket. So this is a 14mm socket, and it fits the seal really well. So I'm going to use that to push it in. And that's it installed, so it went in pretty easily. And now I can install the anti-foaming cover, which covers the port, and it just snaps down in place. Okay, so now I'm ready to reinstall the master onto the hose, and I'm using a new crush washer. And because I'm using this Kuomoto hose, which doesn't have a swivel joint, I'm going to rotate the master around it and tighten it up. If you have a stock hose, it does rotate, so it swivels, so you won't need to do this. You can mount the master on the handlebars and then just tighten the fitting on the hose. Okay, and then just snug it down, and I can do the final torque once it's assembled. For now I just put it level, so it's easy when I'm doing the bleeding, and it's less likely to overflow. And I'm going to snug this fitting down now. That feels good. Okay, so now I'm ready to install the lever, and I've cleaned up everything on the lever, and it has this spring with a plastic piece, so the plastic piece goes into the lever, and the other end of the spring locates in a hole in the master. And I've smeared some silicone grease on the ends of the spring, and also some silicone grease on the end of the push rod. And then line it up and push it in, and then you can push the bolt through the lever, and you often have to jiggle it around a little bit to make sure it's lined up properly, but it should push right through like that. And then there's a lock nut which installs on the end of the bolt. And make sure it operates smoothly. Okay, so now I'm ready to put in some fresh brake fluid, and I'm going to use reverse bleeding, and I have a video which covers that, so I'm not going to explain in detail. I'll put a link to that video in the description, and you can watch that if you're interested. But basically I use a large syringe and push up fresh brake fluid from the slave, and then it comes out into the master. And once you've purged all the air from this area of the master where I drained it and cleaned it, it should be ready to go. So I'll start doing that now, and you should see some brake fluid coming up into the master. And yeah, you can see it filling up now. And then I'm going to stop there and remove that, and then fill it up again, maybe a couple of times, and should be ready to go then. As I said before, if you haven't replaced your fluid for a long time, you should fully drain the system and fully replace it. I did it fairly recently, so I'm not going to do that. Okay, this time I'm going to not take too much out, because I want the port to still be covered with fluid. And I don't, I saw a bubble come out there, so I'll maybe do it one more time. And I'll just take the level down to the top of the anti-foaming cover. Okay, so I'm testing the lever now, and I'm also watching for any air bubbles coming out. And when I first started doing this, I did see a few air bubbles come out, and they've stopped now. So I'm fairly confident that the system is bled of air now. It's looking good, and the level's pretty much perfect. So I'm going to put the cap back on and then test it. Okay, so now I'm going to test the clutch. I'll start the engine and then test the action of the clutch. Here. That feels perfect. Yeah, that feels just right. So it's engaging just as it comes off my knuckles. So good job done.